Okay, hello everybody. I'm very excited to be at Nullcon. This is my first time to India, and I think I'm actually a lot safer here from coronavirus than I would be in the United States, so I feel good about this decision. So my name is Micah Lee. Hello? All right. Okay, so my name is Micah Lee. I am in charge of doing security at the Intercept, which is the newsroom in the United States. I've been working in source protection and in journalist security and encrypted communications for a long time now, and I've specifically been working with journalists since 2013. While Edward Snowden was preparing to leak documents about the NSA and the GCHQ and the intelligence community. I was talking to Glenn Greenwald and Laura Poitras, journalists he was leaking to, and I kind of helped them make sure that they had encrypted communications so that they were doing this as safely as possible, which is why I have my job now, because that was before the Intercept existed. So I'm also a open source developer. I work on tools like OnionShare. If anyone is going to be around on Sunday for the media workshop track, I'm actually releasing a new tool called Danger Zone that I'm excited about, so you should check that out. And also, I come from a tech background, but I do journalism. I accidentally became a journalist just because I wanted to write about things while I was working at the Intercept. So I'm going to talk about all of the leak cases, the cases of whistleblowers who have gotten arrested and charged since Trump took office in the United States. So far, there's 8 of them. And all of these examples are very specific to the United States, but also I think that the lessons are very global because the evidence used against them is I'm going to go into details about all the evidence, but the evidence is just massive amounts of data that leak investigators have access to, and this is true no matter where you are. This is true anywhere in the world. So the key thing is that sources, whistleblowers who decide to talk to journalists, they're not spies. They got charged under the Espionage Act in the United States, but they're not spies. They're just normal workers who do things that, everybody else does. Like, raise your hand if you use a cell phone. Cool, that's a lot. Raise your hand if you have a Google account. Yeah, this is like most people, right? Everybody, maybe? These workers, during the course of their job, they come across something really disturbing, and they feel like it's their, the only ethical thing to do is to expose it, to try and change things for the better. And so the first thing they do is they maybe send a text message to a friend, or maybe they do some Google searches, or maybe if they have access to restricted databases, they do more searches in these restricted databases to find out more information to make sure that they're right about what they're trying to understand. On the government side, when a leak investigation starts, the government first learns about the leak. And normally this happens either when journalists publish an article and there's secret documents published or secret documents referenced, or when journalists contact the government for a comment shortly before they publish their article. As soon as this happens, in the United States, the FBI starts an investigation. If it's a government leak. The FBI, the first question they asked is, who accessed any of these documents and when? And they have a lot of information. And there's other stuff that they start with. The information that they start out with is everything on employer-owned devices. So work computers, work phones, restricted databases. The way that, everything is digital now. So the way that databases work is if you have access to some sort of database and you can find restricted documents, like maybe classified documents in it, you have an account. You have a username. You have to log in. Every search term is recorded with like an exact timestamp in your username. Every document you access is recorded. If you have a workstation and you print something from it, every print job is recorded and stored. And all of this information, the FBI starts with all of this. They also start with any evidence they can gather from work devices, from like work email, from anything like that. So, like for example, if you have a work computer and you use a web browser on that work computer, they have your browser history from that computer. So that's just the beginning. The rest of the tech industry, all of the big tech companies, their business model is collecting as much information as they possibly can on everyone, and the government also has access to all of this. So using court orders and using search warrants, the US government certainly has access to a lot of stuff like this, but so does the Indian government, so do governments all over the world. So if you use a Google account, Google actually has a transparency report. You can look up the Google transparency report for India and see exactly how many data requests Google complies to coming from the Indian government or coming from India in general. So if you use a cell phone, the metadata for all of your SMS messages, all of your phone calls is available. If you use a phone, you probably back it up to iCloud or to your Google account. The backups of your phones are available to investigators, and pretty much everything else. But it's more than that. It's also, once leak investigators get enough evidence against a potential source, then they can get search warrants to actually like raid the houses of sources and search their devices. So like a good example is encrypted messaging apps like Signal, like WhatsApp. These are excellent because they're end-to-end encrypted. And so this means that if the government goes to Signal and says, hey, tell me everything about, tell me all the messages that these two Signal users are sending, Signal just can't do that because they're encrypted from one of the user's devices to the other user's device. But once they're on the device, they're just protected by that device's disk encryption, and very clearly this does not work very well. And so, if you are a suspect and your house gets raided and you get arrested and they take your phone and then they search your phone, they can gain access to all of those messages. Okay, so when you think about whistleblowers and when you think about operational security and being very good at security and hiding your tracks, a lot of people think of Edward Snowden, but he was actually a really big exception to this because unlike almost everybody else, he made a decision early on that there was no way that he could remain anonymous, and so he decided to come forth publicly with his name as the source. And so he took all sorts of steps that were very advanced. Like one of his jobs was training people in training US like spies how to evade surveillance in China. So he had a lot of knowledge about evading surveillance, and he used this knowledge to blow the whistle, but he didn't think that he would get away with it. So rather than getting caught eventually, he decided to like go ahead and say his name, and he just used these steps in order to buy time to make sure that the information could get out there. Okay, so with that, I'm going to start talking about all of the cases of whistleblowers since Trump took office. The first one is Reality Winner. She was arrested in 2017 and charged with espionage. She was the first source that has been charged under the Trump administration. And so she was accused of leaking an NSA document. She's an NSA contractor. She's accused of leaking a document to a news organization that has widely been reported as the Intercept, that described Russian military intelligence, the GRU, a spear phishing campaign, trying to hack, first an American election services vendor, and then their customers, so state election services. So this is going to be a common theme for everyone. The document that was published on the news website it had a crease in it, and so the leak investigators figured it was maybe printed, and they looked at their logs, and they saw that only 6 people printed this. So immediately, the suspect pool was 6 people, and they looked into all 6 of these people, and they found that Winner was the only one who had email contact with the Intercept. And the email had nothing to do with this. The email was that she emailed the Intercept asking for a transcript for a podcast episode. But that's enough. It just means that she's an Intercept reader or an Intercept consumer, and she was one of these 6 people, so she's the prime suspect. But they had way, way, way more information. They used court orders to get data from Facebook and Google and Twitter and AT&T, her phone company. And in the United States, court orders take a lot. They're relatively easy to get. Search warrants give you a lot more information, but you need to show probable cause. But with court orders, you don't have to do this. And so without needing very much probable cause with a court order, they were able to get metadata from all of these companies. So, for example, they got, all of the SMS metadata that she had, all the phone calls that she made, in all of the emails in her Gmail account, the subjects, the to, the from, just not the body. And then they had, by getting metadata from her Google account, they saw that she had written an email to the Intercept, and then they used all of this evidence to get a search warrant to raid her house. When they raided her house, they found handwritten notes for how to set up a burner email address, how to set up a burner phone. She was interested in Tor, and she wrote notes about this. And so they used the fact that she was interested in these technologies as evidence against her. They also seized her computer. They seized her phone. They did forensics on it. And on her phone, they found that she had a screenshot of a web page that listed the 8 secure drop addresses. And so secure drop is a whistleblower submission system. It's open source. Actually, we're having a hackathon at this conference where we can work on fixing bugs in secure drop and adding features, if anybody is interested. And media organizations use it so that sources could more safely communicate with journalists. And so the fact that she was interested in maybe using secure drop was used against her. And then also they had they got a court order for Facebook, for her Facebook metadata, and so they didn't get content from Facebook, they just got metadata, but they got content from the private app data on her phone. So she had the Facebook app installed, they had access to the private partition, and they got the content of messages she sent. And so they used messages that she sent to her sister as evidence against her. And then also her browser history. There was a lot of stuff in her browser history that they used against her, like looking for Tor email services, and also like search results that she had searched for in her browser history. In her browser history, they say that they found her looking up the tips page for the news organization that she is accused of sending this document to, and then also the tips page for a separate news organization. And around the same time, she logged into a Dropbox account. And so the investigators were like, what is in this Dropbox account? So they sent a search warrant to Dropbox, and they also sent a search warrant to Google, and they also had other search warrants, and they got a massive amount of information. Like Dropbox handed over a thumb drive with everything in her account. A thumb drive containing records associated with the following Dropbox account. Google gave them electronic files in excess of 809 megabytes compressed for 2 different Google accounts that she was using. So this is there's just a massive trove of information, and it's really difficult for people to even be aware that all of this data is being collected. Okay, so Terry Albury, he is the second whistleblower that the Trump administration has filed charges with. He's also being charged under the Espionage Act. He was the only black FBI agent in Minneapolis. He was like a victim of a lot of racism, and he basically witnessed what he considered to be human rights violations in the FBI. The FBI was had systemic biases. They were abusing informants. They were basically like finding people who were undocumented or whose family members are undocumented and say, you have to like tell us about your relatives or about people in your community, or we're going to, get your relatives deported. They also, investigated minorities like Muslims and black people, spied on journalists, and he had access to a lot of documents about all of this. So, like with Reality Winner, of the 27, then the news organization that he's accused of leaking to is also the Intercept. Of the 27 documents that were published, he was one of 16 people who accessed one of them. And so he was one of the suspects. And so of those 16 people, he had accessed over 2/3 of those documents. And what's interesting about his case is that they seemed to have a lot of very specific actions that he did on his FBI workstation. So apparently, the workstations of the FBI can tell exactly when you take screenshots and paste them into an Excel document. And when you print the Excel document, even if you haven't saved it and it doesn't have a file name yet. So they have like very specific like timestamps of when these actions took place. And then in this case, there was also security footage. There was a security camera in his workplace that says that on 3 different times, they captured footage of him putting an SD card in a digital camera and taking photographs of his screen. And there was other stuff like that. But like in situations like this, it is incredibly hard to get information out of organizations like the FBI. It's like, it's very difficult. Okay. The next person, the third person is James Wolfe. He worked for the US Senate Intelligence Committee, and he was accused of leaking information about a Trump advisor, Carter Page, and a Russian spy trying to recruit him. He wasn't actually charged with that. He was charged with lying to investigators because the FBI had interviewed him, asked him if he spoke to any journalists, and he said no. But the first thing they did was look through his work email, and they found 5 emails that he had sent from his work email with a journalist. And then also, it's unclear exactly how they know this, but throughout the affidavits and indictments, they talk about him meeting in person at various places with various journalists. They also got a court order for his phone records. They found lots of SMS messages, lots of phone calls that he had with various journalists. But the biggest thing is that they actually quoted the content of Signal messages. And I remember when this story broke, there were all these conspiracy theories about how Signal has been hacked, but the only and the legal documents don't say how they got this information, but the only reasonable explanation is they searched his phone. And so, like, for example, after the story was published, Wolfe congratulated the reporter using Signal, stating, "Good job, I'm glad you got the scoop." And the reporter wrote back, "Thank you," in encrypted Signal messages. So if you're using Signal and you're talking to a reporter, make sure to delete those messages as soon as you're done. Okay, Joshua Schulte. He is the next person under the Trump administration. He's also charged with espionage. He's accused of leaking Vault 7 to WikiLeaks, which is a collection of CIA hacking tools. He was a CIA software developer. And also his case is like different than the rest because like when he during the leak investigation, they found a bunch of child sexual abuse images on his computer and a bunch of other really like gross stuff with this person. But like everybody else, there was so the FBI concluded that the data that was leaked and sent to WikiLeaks was taken from a backup server, and he was only one of 3 people with access to that backup server. And then after WikiLeaks published all of this data, he used a phone number, a Google Voice phone number, and sent hundreds of text messages to his colleagues at the CIA and called people at the CIA, all using Google Voice, talking about the leak. So this was used as evidence to get a search warrant from Google. And then also there was like a discussion on a Reddit thread where he had actually taken some of the source code from a CIA hacking tool and just uploaded it to his GitHub account. So they also got search warrants for Reddit and for GitHub. And when they got the results of their search warrant back, there was a lot of incriminating Google searches. Because if you're logged into a Google search or a Google account and you search stuff, all of your search terms are being recorded. And this is not the first person who records of their Google searches directly from Google have been used against them. So like while on like the day that the investigators believed the data was copied, he was doing all these Google searches about how to efficiently copy large amounts of files. And then he also searched for WikiLeaks many times, read lots of articles about WikiLeaks, searched for things like Assange, searched for things like Tails, the operating system that helps you be anonymous. He actually also searched for how to delete your Google search history, but didn't delete it, apparently. Okay, so the next person is Natalie Mayflower-Sowers Edwards. She worked with the Treasury Department, the Financial Crimes Division of it. And the Financial Crimes Division, they have these documents called suspicious activity reports. So when there's bank transfers that are very suspicious, that the U.S. thinks is like some sort of like illegal activity maybe, or maybe money laundering or something like that, they have these reports. And so she is accused of leaking a bunch of these suspicious activity reports to BuzzFeed. And these all involve Republican people who are associated with the Republican Party in the United States and people associated with Trump's 2016 presidential campaign and all of these really sketchy financial transactions between like Russian officials and oligarchs and things like this. And the interesting thing about her case is they got a special type of court order called a pen register trap and trace. So in the United States, a pen register is you get a pen register against a device, and that allows the government to collect metadata about that communications device, but it doesn't actually say technically how that could happen. So if you get a pen register order against a phone, you can use a stingray and intercept the data from that phone, and as long as you're just collecting metadata, that's fine. But if they used a stingray, they wouldn't be able to collect metadata from an encrypted messaging app. But in this case, they used a pen register, and it says like within approximately 6 hours after the pen register became operative, and the day after one of the articles was published, Edwards' cell phone exchanged approximately 70 messages via an encrypted application with the reporter. So they were able to get real-time metadata from an encrypted messaging app. There was like quite a lot. Like there's 541 messages exchanged. Files were transferred using this messaging app. So I asked Moxie Marlinspike from Signal if they were maybe using Signal, and he said they were not using Signal. Signal has only responded to one data request, and the information is on Signal's website about that. And Signal is engineered to have access to as little information as possible about its users. Signal doesn't respond to trap and trace records, or orders. So I was thinking maybe it was WhatsApp. I asked WhatsApp and they wouldn't comment, but they did, point me to their frequently asked questions for law enforcement, that says WhatsApp may collect, use, preserve, and share user information if we have a good faith belief that it's reasonably necessary to respond to legal process or to government requests. And WhatsApp is owned by Facebook, and Facebook has a transparency report which actually says, publishes information about how many data requests they comply with. And they have a section for pen register trap and trace. And in the second half of 2018, when this one happened, Facebook got requests for 6,193 different accounts, and they complied with 92% of them. So I don't know for sure that this was WhatsApp, but I think it was probably WhatsApp. And I think that the key thing to know about WhatsApp is your metadata is in no way secure, and that if you are, talking to a journalist using WhatsApp, it's entirely possible that all of the metadata about that communication could be just getting sent to the FBI. And then also in this case, they got a search warrant for her Google account, and her Google search history showed her the day after an article was published, searching for the headline of the article and then clicking it. And this was used as evidence that maybe she was the source for this article. And then they also got a search warrant for her phone. They seized her phone and got the content of the encrypted messages as well. And they seized a flash drive and found 24,000 files on it. There were suspicious activity reports, and this was just more evidence. Okay, so the next person, John Fry. He also had access to suspicious financial transactions, and he is accused of leaking the documents that showed that Donald Trump paid $130,000 of hush money to a porn star, Stormy Daniels, in exchange for her staying silent about their affair. So he had access to multiple restricted databases, including one run by Palantir, which is a surveillance company. And just like all of these databases, if you have an account on the database, everything that you do, every search term, every document you access and download is all being logged with your username and your timestamp. And so he conducted a bunch of searches about Michael Cohen, who was Trump's lawyer and fixer, and found a bunch of suspicious financial transactions that Michael Cohen was making. He downloaded some of them. They searched his work computer, found those files. And then they also got a court order for his phone metadata. And right after downloading them, he called someone that turned out to be Michael Avenatti, who was the lawyer who ended up representing Stormy Daniels. And then he also used the FinCEN database, which was the same database that Edwards had access to, and it logs everything in the same ways. And he did a bunch of searches related to Michael Cohen there. And he also made phone calls to a reporter, and then eventually they got a search warrant to seize his phone. They searched his phone. They saw what WhatsApp messages he sent, and they saw the content of the WhatsApp messages, including him saying, "Thank you, beautifully written," after an article was published. Okay, so the next person, Daniel Hale. He is a peace activist. He's outspoken member of Veterans Against the War. He's a drone whistleblower. He worked for 5 years in the US drone assassination program. Part of his job was actually picking out targets to be assassinated by drone strike. And in 2019, he was charged with espionage for leaking documents about the drone program. So he also, it's been reported that the newsroom that he leaked to was the Intercept, and that the specific journalist that he talked to was Jeremy Scahill, who is one of the founders of the Intercept. And this all happened a long time ago. So in 2013, they searched his, he had multiple work computers. He had an unclassified work computer that had access to the internet. He used that computer and searched for this journalist, and he found a book tour. They found that this journalist was on a book tour, and there was a book signing event at a bookstore. And the affidavit says that he he went to this event, met the journalist in person, and then shortly after that, he sent a text message to a friend talking about this. And then they got so in this case they actually got probably a wiretap of his phone, because they have not only the metadata of his text messages, but they also have the content of his text messages. And so like they have the reporter asking Hale to set up a Jabber account so they could have an encrypted conversation. This was 2013. This is before there were encrypted messaging apps. This was when it was kind of hard to have encrypted conversations with people. Now you can just use Signal, and it's much simpler. And I'm not sure exactly how they got this information, but they say that between these two dates, Hale and the reporter had at least 3 encrypted conversations via Jabber. Then they also searched his classified work computer. They saw that he printed secret and top secret documents, and like hours after that, he sent a text message to the journalist. And in August 2014, the FBI raided his house, and they seized his computer and thumb drives. One of the thumb drives had a deleted file on it, which means it just wasn't securely wiped, but they were able to recover it. That was a secret file, and another thumb drive had tails on it. There was no evidence that they managed to get any information from his tails, but just the fact that he was using tails is used as evidence against him. And I think that one of the most interesting things about Daniel Hale is that all of this stuff happened under the Obama administration. And the Obama administration apparently decided not to prosecute him. Maybe it has to do with the fact that Obama was widely criticized for the drone program. But 5 years later, the Trump administration revived the case and charged him with espionage. And then, okay, this is the last one. Henry Kyle Frese. This was just a few months ago. He works for the DIA. He's a counterterrorism analyst, and he's accused of providing information about a foreign country's weapon systems to 2 different reporters. So like everybody else, only 26 people had accessed the secret documents, and so he was one of them. And then the first thing they did is they looked at these 26 people and looked at their social media presence, and they discovered that Frese was following the journalist on Twitter, and the journalist was following him back on Twitter. And then they did and in this case, the journalist was Amanda Macias. And they did public records requests and found that Frese and Amanda Macias share the same home address, and based on their social media, it looks like they were dating. So they did a court order for his phone records, and they saw that he had hundreds of phone calls with her, a lot of text messages with her, and then the other journalist that he's accused of leaking to, he has lots of phone calls and hundreds of text messages with. So they got a search warrant for Twitter. Twitter returned the content of their direct messages, and the journalist wrote a direct message to him asking if he'd be willing to speak with the other journalist, and he said he was down to help. And this is kind of remarkable because they lived in the same house. They didn't need to send Twitter direct messages. They could have just talked. But I think that this is like kind of highlights the problem is that even people with security clearances who work for the Defense Intelligence Agency don't have a concept that everything we do is under surveillance, that everyone is being spied on, that if you use phones at all, if you use computers at all, there's a record, and that the FBI can get access to it. And then when the journalist published an article based on the leaked documents, Frese retweeted the article. And then also, what's interesting about the court order for AT&T is they actually got his location data, not just the metadata for his messages. When he made a phone call with the second journalist, they are saying that he made that phone call from his office at work. And so keep in mind, if you carry a cell phone, you don't have any location privacy. Okay, so what are the big takeaways? So the first, everybody is under surveillance. Everything that we do is under surveillance. This is just like a new world that we live in. There's nothing that it's like really hard for us to do anything about this. It's really great that it's easy now for people to talk to journalists using encrypted messaging apps. This has like made things way, way, way better, but it's not nearly enough. The messages still are on people's phones. People still aren't aware that like if you're using WhatsApp, all of your metadata could be available to investigators. And just everything that happens is being recorded. If you went to a website 2 months ago on your phone, there's a record of that. Maybe clear your browser history. And I think that the biggest thing is that this is not a problem that's easy to solve. This is a problem with how our society works right now, and there's no easy fix. And really, because whistleblowers are just ordinary people, they are not trained in being able to get around this surveillance like Edward Snowden was. They don't have these skill sets. The only way to protect whistleblowers is to just protect everybody. We need to make it so that phones that people use, the software that people use, like tech companies, need to have less data everywhere about everything. And just making it so that everybody has more privacy by default is really the best thing that we can do, but it's a very hard problem. Yeah, that is it. Thank you so much. I think we're running late, but I don't know if we have time for questions.
You spoke about, or you mentioned some apps and tools to use to ensure encrypted communication, to safeguard us from surveillance and stuff like that. That's the technology aspects of it. What about the legal aspects? Legal aspects. What does the law?
So I'm not very familiar with law outside of the United States, but in the United States, there's nothing illegal about encryption. You're allowed to do stuff privately. Like it's illegal to share classified documents. But it's not necessarily unethical to. In many cases, it's ethical to share classified documents. But in terms of just using the technology, in terms of just talking to people using encryption, talking to people anonymously, in the United States, it's completely legal. Any other questions?
So you spoke about signal messages being extracted from the device, right? So wouldn't that require physical access to the device and the encryption to be lifted off by the owner of the device? So is he supposed to comply with the FBI and give him his passcode, or how does that work?
Yeah. So in order to get signal messages from devices, they need physical access to the device.
Yes.
It is also possible that a device could be hacked remotely and the data can be stolen from it. But in all of these cases, they had physical access because they raided their houses and arrested them and took their phone. And then in terms of disk encryption, phones these days, most phones that are new have disk encryption, and the encryption is as strong as your passcode. But a lot of people have really weak settings, and in many cases this can be defeated, and also in many cases a court can order someone to unlock their phone for investigators, and then they have an extra choice of okay, do I want to go to jail for a long time for contempt of court, or do I want to just comply because they're going to get in anyway?
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, it's a hard problem. I don't think I used to way more think that disk encryption would protect people. And I think it does protect people to an extent, but I think that you need to just not have data. You need to delete your messages.
About that, I'm curious because most of the NSA and all people, they don't know about the stuffs like privacy and DuckDuckGo or something like that, because I'm just curious because they should know about these and why they are not even using those kind of stuff.
I think that people who, are contractors for the NSA and other things, or the CIA or whatever, and they're doing Google searches while they're logged into their Google account instead of using DuckDuckGo. I think that it's the same reason why Google is much more popular than DuckDuckGo go in the larger society, right? People like the defaults, the things that the majority of almost everybody uses are not private at all. And I don't think that just because you work for an intelligence agency means that you're more likely to use one of the private options. And I think that's the problem. Like, if Google didn't record your search history by default, if that setting was just turned off by default, then a lot of people would not be in prison right now.
Hi, Micah. I have two questions for you. One is from the Pegasus attack. We've seen how devices were compromised using a 0-day in the WhatsApp video calling facility. And from our understanding, once Pegasus is on your device, you can't remove it. So the phone is going to be permanently compromised. So is that correct? Or is there a defense against Pegasus kind of an attack? That's my first question. The second is metadata, especially location data. For example, today's iPhone or phones which have their batteries which can't be taken out, even if you switch off the phone, I believe it will still continue to have some sort of location data on it, even when you're traveling with a switched off phone. Is there a protection against that to protect your sources?
I mean, so the real protection against location data is don't use a phone. Maybe use an iPod Touch. It doesn't have GPS, but it still has Wi-Fi, and there's still location data because Wi-Fi access points you're connected to could have location data. But that's better. But yeah, I mean, I think that this is one of the fundamental problems. Cell phones were designed without location privacy. That's just how they were built. That's just how they exist now. It's possible to engineer cell phones in such a way that there's location privacy, but you need to completely upgrade the entire cell phone network for this to work, and nobody is interested in it because the governments really like having everyone being tracked. And then your first question about Pegasus is, I mean, this problem isn't unique to Pegasus. I think Pegasus is like a well-known piece of malware, but really, like, whenever there's any attacker that uses a 0-day to compromise your device, and puts malware on your device, it's really hard to do anything about it. I mean, your best defense really is just always install updates as soon as they come out. Try and make it so your device is vulnerable for the shortest amount of time. I do think that factory resetting your phone on a regular basis is really helpful. It's possible that I don't know the details about Pegasus. It's possible that some malwares could survive a factory reset, but most malware doesn't. Even for like iOS, rebooting your phone, often sometimes your phone could get hacked, but there's no way for the malware to persist. So if you reboot, the malware is gone. So rebooting, factory resetting on a regular basis is, getting a new phone sometimes.
Hello. From a philosophical point of view, I would like to know your opinion on an FBI you making use of a stingray attack on a whistleblower versus the legality of a whistleblower trying to expose some critical document which could really hamper the country's defense or something like that.
So your question is, what's the ethics of a whistleblower?
Ethics, from an ethical point of view, what do you feel? What's your opinion? Because if you look at it from the government's perspective, maybe they are doing right. If you look at it from the perspective of the rights aspect, maybe the person who's doing it is always right.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's just with ethical questions like this, it's always case by case. It really depends on what it's about, and I feel like there's definitely good, important work that the FBI does and secrets that are important for them to keep secret. But also if they're doing this to systematically violate rights of everyone of a certain religion or something like that, I feel like it's ethical to expose that. I feel like there's greater good happening, if you expose that stuff. In terms of legality, it's definitely illegal.
Hello, sir. Hello. Am I audible?
Oh yeah, SecureDOP and Tor are are both pieces of software that we will be working on at the hackathon here. If anybody wants to come.
Yeah. So simply means if you want to be whistleblower, first you need to learn how to become whistleblower, isn't it?
Yeah, and how do you learn to become a whistleblower without doing a Google search?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and that's the hard problem is that there's like some stuff that there's some projects that are being worked on that will make this easier. Like I don't know the current state of it, but Firefox is working on building Tor browser directly into Firefox. So if you have Firefox, you go to like super private browsing mode, and then you're anonymous and you can do searches, and then it's like actually anonymous as opposed to just normal private browsing mode or incognito mode. And there's things, and so like if people actually use this when they're searching for how to be a whistleblower, it'll help. But yeah, it's a really hard problem. How are you going to do research on the internet about how to be safely before you know that information? And it's just an unsolved problem. Oh, is it over? No. Oh. You could talk to me after. Okay. Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Lee, for sharing your valuable knowledge with us.